We're going to be talking, I'm doing the second part of his message this morning. And the title of the message is Into the Fields. Into the fields. So Christ says that we must pray for laborers so that we can be sent, and so that they can be sent where? Into his harvest. It's so crazy what a preposition can do, right? If you were to go to a farmer who farms, corn or wheat or whatever, and you came in and you went over there and you said, "Hey, I've come to plow your field and harvest your field," right? He would say, well, great, thank you very much, right? But it's his field. Like, we have no ownership in his field. And so those little prepositions that we would pray for laborers to go out into whose harvest? His harvest. And so we have to develop a heart to become a laborer. Now, I don't know about you. I am not afraid of hard work. I am not afraid of hard work. Some of you may be afraid of hard work. I am not afraid of hard work. But I don't necessarily like doing free hard work. Right? When you ask somebody and it's like, hey, ask somebody for a favor, the degree of how you ask someone for a favor. If I were to go up to Raph and I'm like, "Hey, Raph, I need a favor," Raph would probably be okay with it because he'd say, "Okay, sure, what is it?" But if I went up to Raph and I was like, "Raph, I need a favor," right? Now, I asked Raph if he could do me a favor the same exact way, right? But Raph knows when I go up to him and say, "Hey, Raph, I need a favor," it's probably not going to consume a lot of his time just by the way I asked, right? But if I go over there and I'm like, "Oh, God, Raph, I need a favor," he's going to be like, "Well, before I say yes, right, let me know what your favor is, and I will let you know if my schedule allows me to help you out," right? Nobody likes to do that free labor. But Christ is saying, hey, I need laborers to go into whose harvest? His harvest. Right? Not that we would get the benefit of reaping his harvest, right? I don't know about you. I've never worked like in a harvest field. Some of you may have. I've never really been the garden type, but I have used a shovel, and it is not fun to use a shovel for more than 15 to 20 minutes. You begin to hurt after that, right? It becomes troublesome to work that ground. It becomes hard to work that ground. So how do we develop a heart to be a laborer? The one thing that I really want to get across to you this morning, and the one thing that you can remember as you walk away today, if you were to say, what was the message about on Sunday morning that Jarret spent 25 minutes preaching? What was the message about? I really want to get this across, that we can lead by serving. We can lead by serving. The greatest leaders are the ones who know how to serve, because they know what it looks like to be a good servant. So the one thing, when Pastor Chris asks you, what did Jarret preach about? You say, right? We need to lead. We need to be served to be a good servant. We need to serve to be a good leader. See, I already messed it up. I forgot what I was preaching about. Paul says, follow me as what? As I follow Christ. He doesn't say follow me as I fulfill my own agenda that looks like I am following Christ. Right? As Christians, we have a relationship with Christ. We're saved. We're set free from sin. Right? And then we walk through our lives and we go through our lives. But are we following Christ? As a Christian, we're supposed to follow Christ, but are we absolutely saying, God, lay my path in front of me and I will walk it? See, when Paul says, follow me as I follow Christ, he doesn't say follow me because I am a Christian and I know the scripture, right? He says, follow me as I follow Christ. And I don't know about you, but I have made many mistakes as a Christian. Many mistakes. So if the people that were following me at any point in my Christian walk were to be looking at me and following me because of who I am, then they would see all of the mistakes and all of the things that I screwed up in. But if they were following me as I follow Christ, when I make those mistakes and I fall and I fail, they would see that I wipe my feet off, I wipe my knees off, I repent, and I continue to follow Christ. You see, I have had the privilege of being discipled and being mentored by many men of God. Most that are not in this church anymore. And most of them are not names that you may know. But little bitty processes and little bitty moments and times that I was following someone. When I first rededicated my life, it was Pastor Joe Linton, who's now passed away. He's gone on with the Lord. Pastor Joe Linton for a small season. And then I followed Pastor Brian Woolley for a longer season, right? And then I had older men of God like Brother Bob Tweeka teach me the fundamentals of being a Christian in the Next Steps class. Followed by Pastor Derek for a season to follow underneath him. And now to be a privilege to be able to follow after Chris as he leads us into the next place that this church has been called for. So I get the privilege to be led by these men. And because I am being led by these men and I'm allowing myself to follow after them as they follow after Christ, I've also had the privilege of people following after me. That I may not be in contact with them anymore, but I've had small little stints of time where I was leading them as I followed Christ. And so how do we become laborers? It's not fun to do anything for free. It's not. See, the problem is with most Christians is that they want to be Paul preaching from the pulpit. But we don't want to be Paul on the whipping post. Right? Paul wrote 2/3 of the New Testament. He's the superhero of the New Testament. He's Spider-Man. Right? But when we look at Paul and we say, man, I want to be just like Paul. Could you imagine when Paul said, follow me like I follow Christ, and it was right after the shipwreck? Or it was right after the snake bite that he was supposed to die from? And he's like, oh, I just got bit. Follow me as I follow Christ. And the people behind him are like, are you insane? You just got bit by a viper. Why would I follow you down that path, right? You see, we live in a world of instant gratification. We see people on TV like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos from Amazon, YouTube influencers, right? What's his name? I call him Bozos. Jeff Bezos from Amazon. YouTube influencers, right? Mr. Beast, Ryan, if you have kids, right? Blippi, millionaires, right? Like these people that we see. And we, in this day and time, are so used to instant gratification. Now, anybody under the age of, like, I don't know now, golly, I'm getting old. Anyone under the age of like 30 doesn't know what it is to look into a phone book or to go someplace and have to find a map and not know where you are, right? Because we had the Jeep. Now you have the GPS, you have the phone, you have the cell phone. I remember having to, pull off on side the road during work hours, get a quarter out and go call my wife and tell her I was going to be late when we first got married. Because I didn't have a cell phone, so I had those pay phones, right? But now everything is instant. And so when we look at somebody successful, whether it's in the world or whether it's on the pulpit, we say, well, man, I want what they have. What you see, though, is just the finished result. Or not even the finished result. What we see is the polished result. I won't even say we see a finished result. We see a polished result. If you've never heard the story of Steve Harvey, I like Steve Harvey. He's really funny. Family Feud, if you don't know, right? But if you look back and see what the man's done, he has Family Feud. He has one of the biggest morning talk shows in the United States. He got to announce Miss America and he messed it up. And I think they still invited him back the next year to do it again, even though he's really dropped the ball. Remember, he's like, Miss America, this is you. Oh, wait, never mind, you're second place. Take the crown off her head and put it on him. Right? That's happened. And they invited him back. But what you don't know is when he decided to be a comedian that he lived in his car for 3.5 years. And the first year as a comedian, he made $3,000. The second year was $4,000. The third year was $5,000. Then he would sleep in his car with fishing poles and it had charcoal in the trunk, and he'd go fishing in private ponds so that he could feed himself while he was on his, going club to club to club. Well, we see the funny man on Family Feud. We don't see the man living out of his car for 3.5 years as he chased after his dream. It's like a stone, and we look at a stone and we see a perfectly round stone. If you like to garden and stuff and you buy those stones that go into your garden and they're perfectly round, right? Those stones, some of them are created, but if you were to take a natural stone that was perfectly round and perfectly smooth, that stone could be thousands of years old. That the earth spit that thing out from the ground and it had to make its way into some sort of turbulent water. It had to find its way into a stream from wherever it was birthed or whether it was thrown, wherever. And then from there, it could not sit still in that stream, but it had to follow the stream wherever it was taken to. And as it rolls down the stream, right? You can imagine that a rock that is jagged with all these rough edges, it takes a lot of force to move that thing down that stream. It takes a lot of effort from the river to push that rock down the stream. But then as years go by, as decades go by, as centuries go by, that rock begins to become smoother and smoother and smoother, and it takes less effort for that rock to be moved by the current. It takes less effort for that rock to go where the stream wants it to go because all the rough edges are smoothed off of it. And then somebody plucks it out and says, oh, look what this stream has produced. And that is us as Christians, that we have these rough edges that if we were to get into the stream, it's sometimes hard for us to move where God wants us to move because our rough edges get caught. And God has to move us through and push us through his river, through his circumstance, through those seasons, through those valleys, so that we may be polished, so that when someone may look at us, they could see a polished result of being in the river, of being in the presence of God. But we have to go through the process. Paul even talks about false apostles in 2 Corinthians 11:22. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they Abraham's descendants? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? Then he says, I'm out of my mind for talking like this. I am more. I have worked much harder, been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, and been exposed to death again and again. So not just once, but then again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods, once pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I have been constantly on the move. I have been in danger from rivers, in dangers from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, and danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at the sea, and in danger from false believers. I have labored and toiled, often gone without sleep, known hunger and thirst. I have been cold and naked. Besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for all the churches. Who is weak and I do not feel weak? Who is led to sin and I do not inwardly burn? Paul is saying, I have been there and I have done that. All that scripture to say, hey, I've been there and I've done it. As he's speaking, he's saying, guess what? Nobody ever said walking with Christ was going to be easy. Just follow me as I follow Christ. And that's a hard decision, right? So how do we get there? How do we get the desire to be made into a laborer? How do we get there? How do we develop a heart? You know, I think about a heart for Christ. We can have a heart for Christ, right? We want to see the things of God move in our lives, and we want to see the things of God move in someone else's life. But is there a difference between having a heart for Christ and having the heart of Christ? There's one little switch of 2 letters, of and verses, right? I mean, of and for. The heart for Christ or the heart of Christ? See, to get a heart of Christ, Jesus tells us how to do it. He says you have to pick up our cross. And once Christ's desires are greater than our own, then we can have a heart for labor. You see, if Raph, he disappeared, he must have known that favor's coming. If Raph was more concerned about my life than his own, it would not matter if I went, Raph, I need a favor, or if I went, I need a favor. Right? Would it matter? Because if my life was more important than his to himself, there'd be nothing that I could ask that he wouldn't do. So if we want the heart of Christ, then his heart has to be more important than our heart. His desire has to be more important than your desire. And this is not something easily done, because we're taught now that you should instantly get what you want when you want it. We can have anything we want as soon as we want it. And Christ can deliver everything it is that you need. In fact, he even promises that he'll do so. But you know what? It's on his time and not ours. That's the big difference, right? On his timing versus our timing. That's the catch. So how do we do that? You first have to have a relationship with Christ to know what his desires are. And then as your relationship with him grows, you fall in love with Christ and his desires become more important to you. And those desires become your desires. When 2 people go for a walk, if you go for a walk with another person, it's natural that when the 2 of you are walking together, that the pace is going to be different. But if you walk long enough, someone is going to adjust to the other person's pace. Have you ever been walking with somebody and you're like, hey, slow down, you're walking too fast? Or hey, speed up, you're walking too slow? So that's what we do with Jesus. We begin to walk with Jesus, and Jesus is like, hey, keep up. And you're like, no, slow down. And he's like, hey, keep up. And we're like, no, slow down. And so Jesus says, fine, you want to move slow? I'll slow down. Instead of us keeping up with him. See, it's a decision for us to keep up. But if we don't keep up, he'll slow down. And when we say, God, why are you not moving? And he just says, because I'm going at your pace. I tried to go at my pace, but you couldn't follow. And so all of a sudden we see our Christian walk slow down and we say, oh, it's the devil. It's the attack of the enemy. Maybe we're just not keeping up pace with the person who's leading, right? Maybe we're just not keeping pace. Are you walking with him? His pace or yours? No one wants to labor for free, but we'll gladly do for people that we love. We'll gladly do anything for the people that we love. In John 21:15-19, this is when Jesus reinstates Peter after Jesus denies him 3 times. He says, when they had finished eating, this is after Jesus has come back from the dead and they see him on the shore. Peter jumps out the boat. Like, I love Peter. He's such a mess up. He's all over the place. So, right, they see Jesus on the shore, and Jesus says, hey, throw your net on that side of the boat. So they do it, and all of a sudden they catch all these fish. And then Peter realizes, he has this epiphany that that's Jesus. And so they're like, pull the net in, let's row to the shore. And Peter's like Forrest Gump when he sees Lieutenant Dan, remember? He's like, Lieutenant Dan, and he jumps off the thing, and then there goes the ship right into the dock. Peter jumps into the water. He's like, y'all got the net, I'm gone. Jesus is on the shore. So here's Peter, he's soaking wet. They're tying up the boat. And he says, Jesus looks at him, he says, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? He says, yes, Lord. You said, you know that I love you, right? He said, feed my lambs. And again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my sheep. Very truly, I tell you, you were younger, you were dressed and went where you wanted. But when you are older, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death which Peter was going to have. So he asked Peter, he had to reaffirm, Peter, do you love me? Peter, do you love me? Do you think that Jesus was asking Peter so that Jesus himself could be convinced? Or do you think he was asking Peter so that Peter could be convinced? Peter was so convinced that he was even offended, right? But then as soon as the offense came, Peter said, I'm just asking you this because I need to make sure you're strong. Because right now, you get to dress yourself. And now you get to do what you want to do. But when you're older, you're going to be led places you don't want to go. And your arms are going to be outstretched. And you know what happened to Peter? He was hung on a cross. See, Jesus was telling him, do you love me? Do you love me? Because if you follow me, it's going to be a rough road. But when we get the heart of Christ, what happens? All of a sudden we get boldness to step out. It didn't say that Peter, if you read the book of Martyrs, it doesn't say that Peter chickened out again, right? He chickened out at the crucifixion, but in the end, he didn't chicken out. The Greek word for boldly is tolmir. It means in a confident and courageous way, showing a willingness to take risk. The only way for you to act boldly for Christ, by in itself, the definition involves an element of risk. So therefore, if we were to act so boldly for Christ, we have overcome the fear of that risk. For you to act boldly, there's going to come some sort of risk. Whether it's embarrassment, whether it's fear, there's going to be an element of risk for you to act boldly for Christ. What are we risking? If I were to come up to you and we were having a conversation in private and I were to ask you, what are you risking right now for Christ to be evident in your life? To be bold for Christ, what are you risking? What would your answer be? Because to have boldness, there has to be an element of risk. What is he asking us to do? I talked to someone last week who got baptized, and he says, man, I almost didn't come. I was this close to not coming. But he came. He stepped out boldly and went into the tank. Because there was a risk. There was a risk of embarrassment. There was a risk of failure. There was a risk of something that, hey, will I let God down again? Or will I do this? But you know what? He accepted the risk and he got in the tank. I believe that your best life is waiting for you, but it involves a risk. It involves a risk. It involves walking out boldly for Christ. In Philippians 1:20, it says, I eagerly expect and hope that I will in no way be ashamed, but will have sufficient courage so that now, as always, Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. Why does Paul use the word courage? The reason that he uses the word courage is because in order for us to be bold, we need to obviously be able to take risk, but we have to have courage in spite of fear. I'm going to share really quickly a story. I was just saved, 19 years old, working at a hardware store. God moved one day during a Sunday service, and I was face down at the altar doing this little thing, rocking back and forth, right? And God was moving on me, and my forehead was on the carpet. And as I was like doing all of this, I didn't realize that I was like literally like carpet burning the skin off of my forehead. Okay? So the next day, I had like this huge carpet burn on my head. I mean, it was massive. All right? So I go to work, and of course, what did you think they do? What happened to your head? And guess what? They knew I was a Christian. But you know what I did? I lied. I made something up. Why? Because I wasn't willing to risk the embarrassment. I wasn't willing to risk the jokes. I failed at that moment. Now, I've had many opportunities to, not fail. And I've succeeded in many, many of them. But there's been other failures. But at that moment, I failed. But that moment in failure, I said, God, forgive me. And you look at it now, and you're like, why was I so ashamed of the gospel? Couldn't have I said that yesterday I went to church and the power of God hit me so massively that I was on the carpet for an hour and under the presence of God, not even realizing that I was rubbing the skin off of my forehead because his presence was so thick in that place. Wouldn't that have been a better testimony than lying and saying maybe I fell or something, whatever I told him? I don't even remember. I just know I lied. But the risk, right? The risk. And so how do we become bold, right? How do we get over the fear? In Matthew 10:26, we're not going to read it, but Jesus is talking to his disciples, and with this small 26 through 31, he tells his disciples not to fear, not to fear, not to fear, not to fear. You can go and find that phrase many times in the Bible. Fear not, fear not. But all it really takes is for Jesus to tell me to fear not, and it's over. If the King of Kings, the God of the universe tells me to fear not, then I should not be afraid. If Jesus says it, it settles it. So if we can operate without fear, if we can operate without the fear of the risks, the things that we're going to have to give up, the things that we're going to have to do, then we can see things move in our lives. And I'm coming to a close. Cody, if you want to come. We need to have a commitment to be willing to let people follow us. That's a risk. That's a risk. If I were to call you and say, hey, I need this person to follow you so that you could show them what it's like to be a Christian. That's scary, isn't it? You say, well, wait a minute. I've only been a Christian for a week. I've only read, a chapter of the Bible. But if I were to come to you and say, hey, I need this person to follow you around and I want you to lead by example, that's scary. But that's what Christ told us to do. In the Greek, Matthias, disciple, right? In the Greek is Matthias. It just means pupil, learner, believer. 2 Timothy, when Paul's writing to Timothy, Paul's in prison, he says, hey, you then, my son, be strong in the grace that is in Christ Jesus, and the things you have heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, and trust to reliable people who will also be qualified to teach others. God's going to qualify you to teach others. Discipleship is the process. That Dallas Willard said, discipleship is the process of becoming who Jesus would be if he were you. I'm going to say that again. Discipleship is the process of becoming who Jesus would be if he were you. When Jesus fills up your heart and he removes the things that you were, and he changes you into the reflection of who he is, that's who people will follow. They're not going to follow you. They're going to follow the reflection of who Jesus is, that you're reflecting. Discipleship is not a program that we instill in church. Discipleship is a way of life. And I would go far as to say that you're discipling somebody, but what direction are you leading them to? I know if you would have asked me, Jarret, are you discipling anybody? And of course, I have 4 kids. One's 19. I've been discipling her for 19 years. She's following, and I hope I did a good job. Whether I like it or not, I'm discipling somebody. So it puts a huge responsibility on me to be the reflection of Jesus and be the person who God has called me to be. There are times, if we walk and talk and act like Jesus, things begin to change. As a matter of fact, if you act and talk and walk like Jesus, you won't have to ask people to follow you. You don't have to go up to somebody and say, hey, will you follow me? No, because they're going to see Jesus inside of you and they're going to follow you. Some of the greatest things and accomplishments that I've had are when I was just being who Jesus called me to be and somebody pointed it out. I remember we bought our house 7 years ago, spent $230,000 on this house. We move in, and 1 week later, I find out we have Chinese drywall. So 3 days later, the entire house is gutted. It's like, okay, there's going to go $40,000 down the drain. And so I decided to YouTube about it, and we put it on Facebook. And I'm like, hey, here's the progress. Here's this, here's that. We had Chinese drywall. We're changing this. We're changing that. And I put it out this little video on Facebook, on YouTube. And I had a secular friend of mine give me a call. And he says, Jarret, I don't understand how you can handle the situation that you're in the way you're handling the situation. And guess what I got to say? I didn't get to say it's because I have a lot of money. I didn't get to say it's because I'm better than you. I got to say, hey, you know why? It's because I have the peace of God and know that all things are going to work together for good. And because I don't have to worry about these small, minute things because I have the joy of the Lord. That's why I can get on Facebook and YouTube and have a good attitude about it. You fast forward years later, I'm in Home Depot, right? Used to be a contractor. It's raining, it's pouring, it's nasty outside. I go to check out and everybody's waiting and people are getting annoyed. Cashier looks at me and I said, I'm like, oh man, look, it's raining. And she's like, yeah, it's terrible. I'm like, well, you know what? It could be much worse. I'm glad I'm here. I'm glad I get to go to work today. And she says, what is so different about you? All these other contractors are cursing and they're angry and they're mad because their day's ruined and you're just trying to find the best out of whatever there is. And guess what I get to do? Oh, that's because I have Jesus inside of me. Because now I can look at the situation, it doesn't matter anymore. That's raining. Yeah, it's an inconvenience. Yeah, I have to go through the river and get some of that stuff knocked off. It's an inconvenience. But I got Jesus inside. And so all of a sudden now, I get to be a reflection of who he is. When we lead by serving, we can't ask anyone to do what we're not willing to do. Laying down your life for the kingdom is not something that just can be taught, it must be demonstrated. When we allow Jesus to make us like him, to let his desires become our desires, and his burdens become our burdens, that is when we develop the heart of Christ, the heart of a laborer. Boldness comes from faith. You have to know who you are by knowing who your God is, by knowing that you were saved. We need to go forth with understanding that Jesus will supply every need and he will supplement our shortcomings. He will not send us to do his will without us being fully equipped to get the job done. So if he calls you, go, because he's going to equip you. What is he asking us to do? Preach the gospel. Disciple others to do the same. Lead by example. When I was a kid in children's church, we used to sing this song, right? It was, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine, right? I'm not going to hide it under a bushel. I don't remember exactly how it goes, right? I'm not going to hide this light. But this little light of mine, right? That light is your relationship with Jesus. And it's going to shine. All you got to do is not hide it and not be afraid to let other people see it burn. Some of y'all have like a little bitty flicker and you're like, oh, my light's not big enough yet for other people to see it. But any little bit of light in an area of dark makes a huge difference. So God's given you a light, you have to let it shine. Do you want to lead people? Do you want to see stories in the Bible recreated in your life? Do you want to see the miraculous? Do you want to see great and mighty things done at your hand because of who God is in you? Then become a servant of Christ. Say, I will lead even though I don't know what I'm doing. Let somebody follow me because I'm going to figure it out on the way. And if I can just stay in the river, at the end of my journey, I could be that polished stone, right? I could be that polished stone. It starts with a step. It's a public declaration. It's saying, I want to be changed. I want to be set free. I want to move forward. And Christ died for us on the cross. And then he raised himself up again for us so that we could have this, so that we could spend eternity with him.